because of their own convictions. So these things, I believe, are all a part of the growing pains that actually should, if handled properly, it should actually um, help to perfect the overall church, as well as inform, bring new ideas, new information that could be either incorporated by the larger body or rejected over time based off of where it lands theologically, biblically. Um, what I'm saying is that it could be a good thing. Um, but again, it has to be handled the right way. If you look at Matthew chapter 18, that gives, I think, the perfect scenario in dealing with individual challenges with people at local churches who the Bible says, if one has offended you, you know, get another person.
Yeah.
And then if they won't
Protocol.
agree, get two people. If the original brother uh, or sister still would not um, be willing to be reconciled, and that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about a belief that's moving into the area of being unreconciled because of one's belief, that you would prefer to function away from the overall body and structure. So I'm using Matthew 18, which is a way of dealing with individual challenges. I'm using that as a kind of a platform
Hmm.
or format in terms of how to deal with even theological with larger groups. I believe they should do the exact same thing.
Hmm.
That there should be several meetings. You should bring in several people to work with them, study with them, try to understand what the issues are, and then bring it to a bigger body, and then ultimately to the biggest body. But um, if it can never be reconciled and no one from any of the higher levels or bigger bodies can agree, um, then that group has a decision that they need to make. Now, let me say this: I don't think we should make everything a deal breaker. Everything we believe should not be become a salvific issue that divides. If if you don't believe my way or I don't believe your way, because recognize that it's the devil's desire to steal, kill, and to destroy, and to divide and to conquer. And so he wants to come in between people and good, well-meaning, um, sincere people who love the Lord. The devil wants to come in there and create as much
Hmm.
confusion and division as he can. We know that.
Right. Right.
So I think that we should try to make sure that does not happen by, once again, having a series of meetings, sit down meetings, opening the Bible and understanding what we're learning here. And just like when the Adventist group accepted the message from Rachel Oakes, who was an Anabaptist at the time, Seventh Day Baptist at the time, and then the Advent group accepted the Seventh Day Sabbath as part of their denominational structure. So, they, out of all the denominations anywhere, you can historically look at this. The Seventh Day Adventist denomination actually has adapted and grown and increased in its understanding more than any of the denomination. We do not subscribe to or have a creed. We do not um, lock it in a box and say this is what it is. We do not have one leader that speaks for God over the whole denomination. There's so many different things that I think that make this denomination pretty cool, because I remember when it was 27 fundamental beliefs, now it's 28. That's
Hmm.
showing me something, that the brethren, if you want to call those in the upper offices of this denomination, if you want to call them the brethren, that it may take a while, but there's an openness to understanding and growing. It's not just, no, this is the way we've done things. We've always done things. We never want to hear anything different. That's not the nature of this denomination. So I don't think these beliefs should cause every group to immediately knee-jerk reaction, just run to, oh, we're doing our own thing now.
I so agree with you that this particular church has historically implemented a system that provides for balance and for
Yeah.
corrections of mistakes. What do
Mhm.
you say? What do you say to an individual who learns this particular detail about this issue that has come to the forefront within the Seventh-day Adventist Church? And that is that when, according to more than one person's testimony, that
Mhm.
at the full GC in 2022, that there was a break from either convention or from policy. Maybe it was convention. This convention was that the executive committee for the GC, its members were to be voted on as a unit rather than individually. So historically, you could either they were voted on individually into their positions, or that there could be discussion and a challenge to one of those individuals. In this particular case, the
Mhm.
individual being challenged was the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director, uh,
Okay.
Ganoon Diab. There was a
Okay.
challenge to him receiving another term. And instead of there being a discussion on the floor and then a vote to follow, where he could have been removed, what was decided under the leadership of Ted Wilson, President Ted Wilson, was that the group would be voted in as a unit, as a group. And
Okay.
so because of that, then he, uh, Ganoon Diab, made his next term again. He made his second term has led up to now. For someone looking from the outside in, if you accept that this story, this testimony to be true, and I'm sure that there has to be record. We have to see, there have to be minutes that are provided where you can see that this is what actually took place. But according to two people that I have heard from, including Dr. Conrad Vine, the person in question, the catalyst for all of this, that is what took place.
Okay.
Now, I understand that he had his delegate status revoked before he could even get to the general council, a general conference, full
Oh.
session. But it was the testimony of others that they couldn't challenge this new precedent.
Okay.
So for someone looking from the outside in, what is that? Because you just finished sharing, and I just agreed with you that this church has historically been an example to how to provide balance of power between its members at the bottom, if you will, and its leadership at the top.
Okay.
But this appears to be more than just a stain. I mean, how do we how do you explain that, if you
Right.
can? And it's not your responsibility to do so, but I guess I'm just asking a question. What do you say to someone who says, "Wow,
Hmm.
looks
Yeah,
like"?
that's just what I said when after I heard what you said. I was like, wow. But
So
listen,
you didn't know that one either?
no, 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 I had not heard that. But again, that's not going to get around the world necessarily, but it would get to a lot of people who are interested in knowing those kind of details. But that's not going to get to everybody. You know why? Because that does not change the overall beliefs, the
Right.
fundamental beliefs of what the denomination stands for. Now, we also recognize that anything that's run by people will have imperfections.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't believe that the system and how it votes people in office, we don't believe that that is a perfect mechanism. That's just like in your local churches, how we We have a nominating committee, and by the grace of God, through prayer, and we're about to go through this again in both my churches. The people are imperfect. I'm imperfect. I'm an imperfect pastor giving counsel to an imperfect nominating committee. And we are wrestling over this and wanting to present names. And is it possible for us to make mistakes along the way? Yes. That's why it has to be brought before the whole church. And we hope and pray and believe that when the church comes together, they will, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, either affirm the names that are listed, or they may want some changes to take place. Now, and I'm looking at a local context, because the way our church is set up is the wider and the broader matches in many ways what happens in a local context, because I can bring each individual name before the entire church for a vote, but we don't do it that way. We bring the entire list. Now, if someone raises their hand and has an issue or a challenge with any of the names on the list at all, period, we don't entertain at that moment in front of everybody during the worship service or during the business meeting who the person is to be singled out, and then what the grievance is, or the problem, or the question, or the concern. We don't deal with that individually like that. What we do is we say, well, you know what? We're not going to vote the entire list. We're just going to wait and keep praying. We're going to set up a time frame where those that had an issue with a particular person or persons, that they have an opportunity to meet with the nominating committee and express and explain what those things are, instead to the nominating committee, not to the entire body.
But what you just described, pardon my interruption, is something that I believe would give confidence to anyone who would want to be a part of your church, that there are checks and balances, and that a voice could be heard if they have some information on someone who's not qualified or is just really unfit to be in a position, that they actually have a means of having their voice heard. But the way that this took place, again, I was not there, but I trust the testimonies of the individuals who were there when they say that there was a change. This had never taken place historically, is my understanding. This had never taken place historically. So the voice was shut out. There was no way. There was no way to circumvent this new implementation that everyone witnessed.
But somehow, some way, the majority agreed to vote it to go through, even though they did it this way.
Yeah, you're right. Now it does beg the question, we're the ones who issued the challenge, just not doing the will of God. But there's also an alternative answer to that question. Could it be that the vast majority of those delegates were asleep and they couldn't see? I mean, metaphorically asleep. They didn't see what was taking place, but they didn't have the information because the person never had a chance to voice it. If the person had a chance to voice the concerns, it may have awakened them. But since that opportunity was shut down.
I see. But let me say this though. I believe, I'm not sure again at that level how things will function. But the difference between them bringing the entire list and going through and bringing each name for a vote, I believe that those options are still granted. The voting body, then they have a decision to make, don't they? Say, hey, look, we can keep voting this down all night long. You keep bringing the whole list, until you get to the point that we're not accepting the whole list one vote across the board. And the voting body, it seems to me, if they're that much against it, then they can make that wish clear. So I think that even with the switching of it, um, enough people felt that it was not a concern to the level of of rejecting the vote and moving this process forward.
I can
But
roll with that and
mm,
not disagree. So
yeah,
I would then pivot and say, do you think that what are your thoughts on Dr. Conrad Vine? Do you think that what he said was not true? Was there truth in there? And should he have been shut down? Because I think that whether some agree with what he says, or whether or not everyone agrees with anything or everything that he said is not a, there's a question there. We're going to
right.
have division, but whether or not this guy was censored, and you can see he's being shut out, there is no question there. When you look at everything that's taken place with this guy, there is no question there. But what do
Now,
you
please
do? You
bring me up to date. Was he censured? Was he fired? What is his status, and how much
well,
of
he's
that
not.
can you attribute to what he stood for?
So 1 month ago, he's the head of a ministry, an independent ministry that does missions.
Okay.
I forget the name, but he's not employed as a minister of a church, as a pastor of a church. But he does speak quite a bit. He speaks a lot, and he's a guest speaker in many camp meetings, many conferences, and many churches. And so after he said what he said, the Michigan conference bans him from being a speaker. That's the memo that they send out.
Oh,
He gets canceled from an event put on by Stephen Bohr and his independent ministry. He gets all of his sermons removed from the platform Audioverse, which coincidentally or not, Stephen Bohr is a director of this ministry. So Stephen Bohr cancels him, and then he has him removed from Audioverse. And he gets a response, Conrad Vine, that is, gets a response from Mark Finley, GCVP, Ivor Myers, Stephen Bohr. Everyone is chiming in on the Conrad Vine thing. People who have influence in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, having given that information, how does that sound to you? Does that sound like what he's experiencing is the consequence of what he said in August, an intentional consequence?
wow. That's very unfortunate. Definitely seems to be. I had an opportunity to watch one of his messages, but I see it's not always what is said, but how it's said. We can speak truth, but when you get to a certain place where you say what should or should not happen to conference officials if they don't believe the same way you believe, I definitely think that's overstepping one's bounds. As an employee of said organization, and I don't know if he ever was an employee of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination or not, but to be trusted to be a speaker that travels around and speaks to large congregations, even at camp meetings, one should be very careful that they don't put their beliefs in opposition to the general belief and understanding of the denomination who's entrusting them to go around and speak. And if one does, they should not be arm twisting and saying that the conference should do this or should do that. That's not the right forum for it. And that's not the message that we've been called to preach and to teach both of our members and also the gospel around the world. There's another place for that. But the video that I saw had a lot of truth in it, a lot of good things he was saying, wonderful things. I resonated with it. I believed in most of what he was teaching and preaching. But when he got to the point of saying that he felt that certain leaders should resign and step down and so forth and so on, that's not his place to say that. And this is again my personal understanding that love is patient, love is kind. It does not vaunt oneself ahead, nor does it keep record and these kinds of things. And I felt that was not the most loving way of addressing challenges or issues in the structure. We know that the structure is going to have, what should I say, is going to come late as it pertains to learning, growing, adapting to new challenges and things that this entire denomination is facing. Because why? You're looking at a church over 120 some odd years in existence. So that's not going to just drop and change on a dime. So it's
would
one
you
thing
say
to
this
preach.
is impossible?
You see what I mean?
Okay. No. I understand. I see your position, and your point of view. It would seem to suggest to some that in your take that God would, by way of the Holy Spirit, not ever compel someone like a Conrad Vine to say what he said, where he said it, and when he said it. Would that be your belief? Because some would argue, well, if not then, and if not in that platform, where then should he have been able to make a suggestion, whether it's with regard to resigning or whether it's with regard to what options the lay people of the Seventh-day Adventist Church have in the event that there is perceived apostasy taking place? So if not where he spoke, where would he be able to say those things? And I know this is getting a bit touchy again because I don't want you to say anything to get your own self in trouble, but
No, I'm okay.
So where could he say it? And based on what you said, it would seem as though God would never do that. But you didn't say that God would never do that. It was just one might draw the conclusion that you are implying that God would never do that. So I guess I'm just making that question direct now. Do you believe that God would never use anyone like that? And do we have any biblical? Do we not have biblical examples of where someone went against the established organization? And said some things that everybody else thought that wasn't kosher, wasn't good, and was going to cause division, but it was God's will nonetheless that they did those things.
Right. God does work in mysterious ways.
Take some time to think.
Yeah, and I'd have to look at each situation and scenario, but I do know that once again, Matthew 18 is you're supposed to go to the individuals that you're talking about. And that discussion needs to be had with them personally and privately.
First.
first, before I make a public statement as to what someone else should believe and or do, I should talk to them individually myself first, and then again, several meetings and so forth and so on. But by time it all comes out, everyone has been given enough of an opportunity to take their stand and make their decision. So then you can say, I have already talked to President so and so. I have already talked to other leaders and so forth and so on. And we have prayed over this, and we have wrestled with this, and we have tried to come to terms with this. But from my understanding, they are unwilling to take a stand on the side of what I believe is truth. Then I would say, because of that, I believe that if this continues, there may be some options, so forth and so on, and I may have to make another decision based off of my personal membership if there's no willingness in the future to move in the direction that I believe God is moving. I think that is a little, and maybe he did that. I don't know. This particular scenario you're talking about, maybe he did that, and I'm just not aware of it. What meetings he may have had behind closed doors before he made that statement. Maybe he did.
Right.
But I didn't hear him say that.
Yeah, no, I didn't hear him. I heard him neither confirm nor deny that he followed Matthew 18 and went to President Ted Wilson first to discuss the matter. Neither did I hear Mark Finley, any of the other speakers who offered a rebuttal say that he failed or that he tried to go to Ted Wilson to say that. So neither side, neither confirmed nor denied. I guess that begs a question too, like, does he even have opportunity to implement Matthew 18 with Ted Wilson? Now, he may, before the ordinary layman, I believe that Dr. Conrad Vine would be able to get an audience with President Ted Wilson over the someone who's at the bottom, ordinary layman. But even he may find himself hard pressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
To getting meeting with him. So and so what does they can't even get a face-to-face and implement Matthew 18. That's the, you don't have to answer that question, but I can see where that might be the dilemma that's at hand.
But that can be shared as well. All of the attempts. And who in the organization and at what level you were able to discuss this with some form of pastor and or evangelist conference official. So again, you're sharing the attempts that have been made, the letters that have been sent, the emails, the calls that were either ignored or people said they would call back but didn't, or meetings that you tried to have but didn't have. All that is very important.
Yeah. So this comment came in a little bit earlier, and I think I understand now where what it's addressing. I believe it was addressing the break from convention at the general conference full session, whereby the dissenting voice, or the voice that wanted to challenge the nomination and the vote for that singular individual, Ganoon Diop, was shut down, and they didn't have a chance to do that. So the question is, doesn't that assume that the board members would have understood what was at play beforehand? So assuming that that we have this context, right? What if, well, the question is asking, wouldn't all the members of the GC executive committee known beforehand that when they got to the general conference full session, that was the move that they were going to make?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
if the,
Yeah.
I mean,
I
is it
would say
possible?
most likely. I mean, that they're not going to just pivot and do an audible and just, willy-nilly throw something out there that has never been done before, without having it, having that well thought through previously.
And now I agree. And I got confirmation that was Jay McCoy's, that's what he was trying to convey.
Okay.
Now, you and I both agree that had to have taken place. Why would they call an audible at the last minute and do something different? If they know that beforehand, it just, does that not, am I the only one who would say that seems a bit suspicious? That why would you seek plan to do this, to shut out dissenting voices, unless you, one, you knew it was coming, and two, you didn't want to have to face a vote that could potentially disrupt the objective that you had, and that was to keep the same unit in place. I don't know. Is that logic? Is the logic off? Is it missing something?
Well, no one that is a member in good and regular standings at any level of this church, and then at that level, who is a delegate, should be silenced or unheard, or caused that their concern and their voice would not have an opportunity to be spoken up for the wider group to be able to hear it. I'm actually a bit shocked, and that's very unfortunate. That should not ever happen at any level of the church. In fact, we welcome these kinds of comments. That's what we want. In fact, you can't, Robert's Rules of Order, you can't even call for a motion and then a second without giving opportunity for a question. And that goes for any and everybody under the sound of your voice.
Right.
And that's before you call for the vote, that opportunity is given. So I don't know why there would not be, and this is another voting situation, I don't know why there would not be an opportunity for that question to be raised prior to all in favor say aye and the same reject. Because if that's the case, somebody's not following regular protocol, Robert's Rules of Order, how to conduct the board meetings. And at a major level, it seems that there's a misstep there. If what's true, what you're saying, that no one was given the opportunity to raise a great concern that could have been heard by everyone, that might have enlightened people to vote differently, or they might have even taken it back and brought the names out differently.
So Jay McCoy from, let me put that back up there again, who's commenting from Instagram, has actually said that he experienced something similar, except that in this particular case, everyone did not know. So that means that, I guess, a singular individual knew what they were going to do without the benefit of everyone else knowing. And so something similar took place. I still sort of seem to roll with, at that level, at the highest level, that they probably all knew it was probably their plan. But they're just as Jay McCoy just said, there's a chance that it could have been just one person who called the audible, but because it benefited everyone that was there,
Mm,
no one opposed it. But so that
mm,
begs this question here, because what you just talked about raises the issue of one's uh, conscience, their liberty of conscience versus their tendency or their obligation to be in compliance with their governing body of their church. When does complying with church policy become problematic for an individual's faith? How should one who's watching, because they may be confronted with something like this a little bit later
right.
on, how do you decide when something that's going on within your church is going against your conscience, your sanctified, godly inspired conscience, but something is at stake, whether it's membership or whether it's holding on to a position? How should someone navigate this
Mhm.
dilemma?
That's a very good question. And let me say this to, was it Jay McCoy
Yes.
who made that comment? Um, I'm certainly sorry that you experienced something like that, even at a local level. Um, that is not the way things are supposed to go. And we're striving to make all the different local church, um, the political format, we're trying to make them fair, make them the way God intended. And so let me start by apologizing to him. But don't give up on the church. But once again, there's a difference between the 28 fundamental beliefs of a denomination and then the what is called the manual, the church manual, um, in terms of how everything is laid out there, how everything should operate. But the manual is not, it is really a guideline as to how churches should function, but it does not say that in harmony with what the manual is saying that churches may, as long as it doesn't go directly against the manual, but they are encouraged to meet their local situation and dynamic that
Mhm.
maybe the writers of the church manual were not able to either imagine or consider because it might have never happened to them in their context. But there's room to move and uh, and to work together. And as long as the entity in the group is working together, and once again not going directly against any of the church manuals guidelines, they should be fine um, moving forward, especially if it works and if God is blessing. And that helps each church to be able to take the guidelines, but then to shape it within their own individual context and not feel like it's a cookie cutter type experience. But just remember, anything that people do in terms of operating and polity, or the whole voting process, and and the operations manual, so forth and so on. There are some imperfections there. There are some also situations where you try to make it fit, but in this place, in this country, in this culture, it might not just fit just perfectly
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
same way. But that's not a reason to leave the denomination because you don't agree with how um, um, that local church or the wider church handle the situation in terms of voting in officers, or even in with disciplining members, or in how we do and function in different operational things and things like that. All those things that all can be cleared up. They all can be dealt with, but we all still believe the same 28 fundamental beliefs. It does not change the core of who we are as a denomination in terms of beliefs, but all of those different politics, if you please, church politics, you're going to have these challenges. And I don't believe anyone should leave the whole denomination based off of that, because um, people can do things the wrong way. And is God still working in that situation? I believe He is. Sometimes it takes a little time for things to come around and to set things right and set it straight, because there's some stubborn people and they want to go about things, and or sneaky people or even evil people in wrong position, or power hungry people, and they have their own agenda. But I do see how God has set
Mhm.
things straight. He's set things right in His church. Whenever people have tried to take over God's church, they're doing a very dangerous thing, and I've seen how God can deal with that. And I've experienced that in my own situation, how God deals with that personally, because it is His body. And some things you just have to let it play out, even though that vote went through and this wasn't right and that wasn't right, and so forth and so on. We don't think God knows that.
Yeah. So I like, yeah, I agree. So I like your suggestion that, an individual should not make a decision, certainly not a first level decision to leave a church because there is a disagreement, but rather try to figure out how you can live with, continue to function with that disagreement, if possible, if at all possible. I guess the question, though, the follow-up question becomes like, what happens when it gets beyond that point? Perhaps things are taking place within the church that are violating biblical principles. So is it possible to disagree with church leadership or government mandates and maintain unity? Or is a split, whether that's formal or informal, meaning like in the example that we talked about during World War I, where there was an underground Seventh-day Adventist movement. After that dilemma or that controversy was over, after the war was over, they came back together, but there was, for a period, division. They still maintained the same name, but they were just operating separately. Is that inevitable here with the Adventist Church? And has that been prophesied? Or do you still think that no matter what the scenario is, that there can be unity, and that as long as you follow protocol, that things should work out?
Very good questions. I mean, I personally believe that our denomination is already set up for grassroots, what they would call underground believers, keeping to their convictions and holding to their faith. Because every Christian, that's exactly what you should be anyway, um, underground and above ground. You should be both anyway. And what I do in my personal experience with God, I don't wait for a conference permission or dictates or complain about who's the new pastor, and that has nothing to do with how God has spoken to my heart how He speaks to me each morning in my personal devotion. So I believe that sometimes we get it mixed up, that everything in the wider organization must be on the exact same page and function as how God has revealed to me personally in my experience.
So are you saying that people should hold to their conscience and what the Holy Spirit is speaking to them? And
Yes.
I won't get into the whole, well, this person can't possibly know what the Holy Spirit, that's who,
Right,
whether the
right.
Holy
Well,
Spirit
and
speaking.
they take that risk also. You step out there. Remember,
Yep.
the Bible says, wide is the way that leads to destruction. Many there are that go in thereat, and straight and narrows the way to eternal life, and few there are that find it. You have to be very careful before you do something individually that is so different than the beliefs of the organization that you joined, that it could seem like you're going against it, or that you're saying they are no longer doing what God has called them to do. You have to be very, very careful. It has to be very egregious. It has to be something biblical in its foundation to cause someone to go to that extreme to disassociate themselves or even cut off themselves from the organization. But I guess what I'm saying is that the fundamental beliefs are rock solid, right? No one is going to sit up here and say, oh, we don't believe any of those tenets anymore. Well, if you didn't believe that, you wouldn't have joined the Seventh Adventist Church in the beginning. And if you started out agreeing with all this, but then later you don't agree with it anymore, then what happened to you? So, that's not the issue here. The issue is not the fundamental beliefs.
Right. I agree.
The issues are other things, such as should the church back people up when they want to refuse the COVID vaccine on their workforce? You see that? Or, how should we vote in this situation and deal with this governance and so forth and so on? All of that is in my understanding, falls in a totally different category than the fundamental beliefs. Now, once you start getting into the church politics and getting to how things play out with religious liberties and so forth and so on, what the church did for you or didn't do for you and so forth and so on, I already said, as long as humans are involved, there will be imperfections, right? There's going to be things that's not going to happen right, but you can still believe that you're part of the denomination. But as you're functioning within the said denomination, in that local context, you might not be able to meet with that group if they're that far out of the established proper way of doing things. And then you report to your pastor, who reports to conference leadership, who reports to union leadership, who reports to North American leadership, who reports to the GC. So that's got to go up and up and up. And at some level, there's supposed to be check and balances that's going to send back down the change and to deal with that mess at whatever level that it is, so that they should come in and be able to stop whatever the issues, challenges, and problems are that's going on. But no one person should be trying to fight their own battle, because the whole church is not set up that way. You can be a voice crying in the wilderness, fine, but at some point in time, you still have to follow the proper protocol, which is you have to look at what entity is just above the one that is quote unquote apostatizing. And if that's a union doing that, then North America's responsible to God to deal with the union. And if the North American division is out of is away from the Bible, the GC is responsible to God to deal with that. We can speak truth to power, that's fine, but that's only going to most likely have a minimal effect and can sometimes get ourselves in trouble, but it has not set the ball rolling in the right direction to bring about real change.
So, I totally agree. I think that the way the organization has the organizational structure, the governing system has been set up, it has made many provisions for the checks and balances that are necessary to keep unity and to keep the balance of power where it needs to be. So as long as you're talking about the principles of the Bible, the core principles of the Bible, that you're not going to have a problem within the Seventh Day Adventist Church, because of the way that it operates. But what about those issues that fall outside of something that's salvific, that's determines your salvation. And so let me set you up as I ask that question.
Okay.
Let me set you up for your final thought. You know, this whole issue, the reason why we're having this conversation is because Dr. Conrad Vine made a suggestion that I think everyone who has watched him will all agree that the nerve that he struck was one surrounding money. As soon as he said or suggested that you could redirect your money to a conference other than the one whose region you live in, that is what set everything off. It set things off even to the point where the rebuttals that were being offered, that were being given, were actually misstating what he said.
Okay.
It went from him saying, redirect the tithes to a conference where you are confident that the leadership is doing the will of God, from the conference that you're in where you're not confident that they are. That was what he said. And then it became him saying, don't send your money at all. Redirect them to, for example, an independent ministry. So it's not what he said. Anyone who goes and watches and listens to what he said, you will see that. But this struck such a nerve. Soon as it became about money, that this is why we're having this discussion. And consequently, all this other stuff that I'm sharing with you, like the GC full session where the vote was shut down, that came out as a result. So because there's controversy and people are choosing sides, people are now coming out and exposing other stuff that was being done. So they're saying, oh, you know, he said this. Oh, well, you want to know what he did at the so-and-so? This is what he did. And so all of this stuff, and then people are corroborating it. You know, all of this is taking place on YouTube, mind you, because the revolution is not televised. You know, I don't expect for this to be an announcement, you know, in church, or a memo that's being passed down to give. It's not going to be in the periodicals for the Adventist Church. I wouldn't expect for that. So therefore, the revolution is not televised, but this is being talked about. Okay, so what I want to end on is something that you already touched on, and that is one's liberty of conscience. People have begun to think that, as I read people's testimonies, and I've heard them share their testimonies, that they feel like their liberty of conscience is being inhibited, you know, is being inhibited by leadership. And so that begs the question to viewers, what do we do? Because there are people who feel like they should at all cost do what they're told if the church says to do it, versus and not go with what their conscience or the Holy Spirit speaking to them. We like to use that term, conscience. And so let me give you an opportunity to share your final words on this whole matter. You know, like I said earlier, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not the only church that has experienced splintering or splitting or division. You know, the Presbyterian Church in recent decades was one that experienced it. The Lutheran Church about 15 years ago was one that experienced a formal split in two different organizational bodies. Just last year, at the end of 2023, the Methodist Church experienced a formal split, two separate bodies. It doesn't appear, and I would not think, if I were a betting man, that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is poised to experience a formal split. But will it experience division such that there is a type of informal split, like the ones I described historically that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has already experienced in World War I, during World War II in Russia? The same thing happened. There was an underground movement. There was the official church doctrine or edicts that went out that said support the Red Army, but there was an underground church that said, no, we're not going to do that. There was an official Seventh-day Adventist directive that said in Vietnam that you had to follow the mandates of the government and send your kids to school on the Sabbath. But then there was an underground movement that said, no, we're not. We're going to reject even what the GC said, or maybe it was just the conference that encompasses Vietnam. It said, no, we're not going to do that. They're not going to church. So there was that type of informal split. So I guess my question is, could the Seventh-day Adventist Church be going down a path where something similar to that take place? But you go ahead and give your final thoughts for the whole matter.
Wow. It certainly does appear that that is a possibility. We have to pray for not only our church leaders, we have to pray for every sincere believer and small groups who feel like they need to go underground to follow their conscience. My heart goes out to each one of them. But as soon as it gets to the point where they believe that they're the only little group that's correct and everyone else is wrong, and then they begin many times to throw shade on and disdain on the entire organization and everyone that they were once a part of, to say that all of them are now wrong and out of the will of God. That's a road to fanaticism, and that kind of rogue behavior is not how the Spirit of the Lord works. But if it is a sincere group that is keeping the truth, it will not conflict with the 28 fundamental beliefs that make us all members. And so it'll take a long time for that group to become completely separated in terms of an official split. But that sincere group of people need to follow the dictates of their conscience as God is leading them. And if it is truth, they will still remain a part of the body, even though they're not attending or returning their tithe the way that the system has set it up. But if they're sincere and if they are following the Lord and still believe in the 28 fundamental beliefs, then I believe that over time, God will bring that movement all together again, and hopefully all that they were standing for was heard. It's almost like you're picketing. You know, you see people that hold up those signs, they're picketing, and they're walking the streets of the same company they're employed by. You know, and guess what? They're still employed by them, and a formal split hasn't occurred yet, but that doesn't keep them from voicing their opinions. So I don't like groups that try to silence and say you're not allowed to speak up and you're not allowed to say what you don't agree with, and what's wrong with some things that have happened. That's necessary in order for the larger body to actually hear what's happening at the grassroots level, what they're dealing with, what they're going through, and say, hey, some of your policies, they're not working out for the everyday person in their local context. And if nobody can hear us, and the only way you can hear us is if we make our objections known. But once again, I do feel like it should be individually to the leadership who's in charge of the challenges that if someone is dealing with something that they have to talk to the leaders first. But if they won't hear them or give them an audience or give them any opportunity at all, period, they should make that known that they have at least attempted to. And then they should speak truth and sound the alarm. Ezekiel 33, we're supposed to lift up the trumpet, sound the alarm. That's who we are as a people. And if that's the only way truth can get out, then let it get out. But you notice something. I don't think you told me that Vine was disfellowship. So, I mean, even within all that's happening, his membership is still intact, which shows that even in the midst of the disagreements and everything that's going about it, even the way he's going about it, this denomination has not disfellowshipped him.
Right.
Still giving opportunity to learn. Let's learn from this. He's saying essential and important things that can benefit this church. Don't silence him. Learn from it. And the mere fact that many people have been made aware of this topic, it shows me that I think that he's doing a good thing. But I do think he went a little too far when he was presuming to say what should or shouldn't happen to other people's employment. And I think that was presumptuous and unfortunately could take away from the good message that he was trying to put out.
So what you just said about the fact that he hasn't been had his membership revoked is certainly a credit to the system that was put in place long before he or the current leadership came into existence. You're right that it's the local church that determines what happens to someone's membership. So, however, you know, what he has experienced, you know, one has to wonder whether it is all choreographed, it's intentional and malicious, if I might not add, because it is a dissenting voice, you know. But you're right. He still gets to keep his membership, which is a good thing. And again, that's a credit to the Adventist Church, Seventh Adventist Church structure by design. I guess, you know, my final thought, you know, is basically I concur with you that, you know, things should follow a proper protocol. The great start is with Matthew 18. It works for individuals. It works for groups. It works whether you're in the church or whether you're on the job. And I also agree that, you know, with so much that Dr. Conrad Vine said, you know, it just looks awfully suspicious. I've got some other concerns with some of the members, and some of the things that they've said, but we won't talk about that in this conversation here. It is just a reminder, though, that we are living in the last days, most certainly, and that no group, no denomination is invincible or is free of problems and trials and tribulation. Stand by with me, if you will, for a debrief. Just as I give my closing, today's conversation has certainly reminded us of the delicate balance between church authority and government mandates and personal conviction. Now, while denominations may face splits, as we talked about, the three churches in the past 20, 30, 40 years, the Lutheran Church, the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Methodist, while they all experience splits, one principle remains constant, that the importance of liberty of conscience is at play. Each of us must carefully consider where to stand, but it's clear that our ultimate guide is the Bible. When conviction calls, it must always align with Scripture. As we move forward in our faith journeys, let us remember that God calls us not just to be obedient, but to be thoughtful, prayerful, and a reflection of His Word, even when it challenges the status quo. So may we all seek to remain true to His voice, living out our faith with courage and grace. And with that said, blessings be upon you, and we'll see you next time.